Radiation is literally all around us. It's coming from the ground we walk on, it's streaming down from the sun. It's just a fundamental force of our universe. But what happens when that invisible energy gets super concentrated? Well, we're about to take a tour of the most radioactive places on Earth, a kind of journey through a dark map that reveals the planet's raw power, our own incredible mistakes, and some truly mind-bending natural wonders.
And look, for the most part, this constant low-level hum of background radiation is completely harmless. Our bodies are totally used to it. We've evolved with it. It's just the normal state of affairs for life on this planet. So think of this as our baseline, right? The quiet backdrop against which the extreme places we're about to visit are going to stand out in, well, shocking relief.
These are the big questions we're digging into. What happens when you crank that dial way, way up? Sometimes by accident, sometimes by design, and sometimes, incredibly, by nature itself. The answers are both terrifying and, honestly, absolutely fascinating. So our first stop is probably where your mind goes right away when you hear the word radiation: catastrophic accidents. These are the spots on the map where human error, bad design, or just plain negligence unleashed forces that are almost impossible to imagine. Let's just start with the one everyone knows, Chernobyl. And let's try to wrap our heads around this number. A dose of about 5 sieverts, that's fatal for about half the people who get it. The levels right near that exploded reactor core, they were over 300 sieverts per hour. This wasn't just dangerous, it was an environment fundamentally incompatible with life. It was a zone of instant death created in a matter of seconds. Now, while Chernobyl is the most infamous, the Fukushima disaster in Japan back in 2011 was a catastrophe on a similar scale. But it was a whole different kind of nightmare. Chernobyl was like a volcano. It exploded and shot fallout into the sky, poisoning a continent. Fukushima, on the other hand, was like a massive, slow bleed. A tsunami triggered a meltdown that led to a colossal contamination of the Pacific Ocean. It really highlights the two different ways this can all go wrong, one from a failure on the inside, the other from an overwhelming force from the outside. But almost 30 years before Chernobyl, there was another disaster at the Soviet Union's Mayak nuclear facility, one that was swept under the rug for decades. This wasn't a reactor meltdown. This was an explosion in a tank full of high-level radioactive waste. The Kishtim disaster created this miles-long plume of contamination, and because it was kept secret, it's this chilling reminder that the danger doesn't just stop when the fuel comes out of the reactor. Managing the waste is a whole other beast. And not all of these catastrophes involve massive power plants. In Goiânia, Brazil, in 1987, the source was this tiny capsule of cesium-137 from a piece of medical equipment just left in an abandoned clinic. Scavengers found it, broke it open, and were just mesmerized by this beautiful blue glow it gave off in the dark. They thought it was magic. They showed it to friends and family. People touched it. A little girl even painted it on her skin. And just like that, a single, unsecured source, through simple human curiosity, kicked off a devastating crisis that led to deaths, hundreds of injuries, and the demolition of whole city blocks. Okay, so beyond the sudden, shocking accidents, there are places on Earth that were contaminated slowly, deliberately, and over again. These are the proving grounds of the Cold War, landscapes scarred forever by the race for nuclear supremacy. In Kazakhstan, there's a place called the Semipalatinsk test site, known grimly as the Polygon. For 40 years, this was the heart of the Soviet nuclear weapons program. We're talking over 450 nuclear explosions. So unlike a single accident, this was a sustained, chronic assault on the environment. The repeated tests blanketed the whole region in fallout, leading to just devastating, multi-generational health problems for the people living nearby, problems that are still being dealt with today. And a very similar story was unfolding in the United States. At the Nevada test site, over 900 nuclear tests went off. And those radioactive clouds, they didn't respect the site's boundaries, of course. They just drifted for hundreds of miles, dusting communities in places like Utah and Arizona with fallout. These folks, the downwinders, they experienced this silent, invisible exposure that led to clusters of cancers and illnesses that took decades to even be acknowledged. Then there was the U.S. testing out in the Marshall Islands, which peaked with the Castle Bravo test. Now, this wasn't just another bomb. This was a thermonuclear device, a hydrogen bomb, 1,000 times more powerful than the one that destroyed Hiroshima. It literally vaporized entire islands, contaminated a massive area of the Pacific, and made places like Bikini Atoll completely uninhabitable to this day.
The legacy of that single test is still felt in the land, the water, and the health of the Marshallese people.
So far, pretty much everything we've seen was created by us. But now the story takes a really surprising turn. Because some of the most radioactive places on Earth have absolutely nothing to do with people. They are the result of pure, powerful geology. Just take a look at this chart. In parts of the city of Ramsar, in Iran, the natural background radiation is just off the charts. Hot springs bring radioactive elements like radium up to the surface, and that stuff gets baked into the soil and even the building materials. So residents there can get an annual dose that's 10 times higher than the maximum allowed for a worker at a nuclear power plant. And here's the mystery. They don't seem to have the health problems you'd expect. It's a puzzle that still has scientists scratching their heads. And you see a similar, though maybe less extreme, thing happening in Brazil. The famous black sands of Guarapari Beach are radioactive because they're full of minerals that contain thorium and uranium. And for decades, tourists have flocked to these beaches, with some people even believing the radiation had healing powers. It's just this wild example of how radioactivity is woven right into the fabric of the planet. And now for the most incredible example of all, we have to go to Oklo in Gabon. 2 billion years ago. Long before humans were even a glimmer of an idea, Earth created its own nuclear reactor. A rich deposit of uranium ore mixed with groundwater in just the right way kicked off a sustained fission reaction that ran, on and off, for hundreds of thousands of years. So not only did nature beat us to nuclear power by a long shot, but the site also teaches us an invaluable lesson. The radioactive waste from that ancient reactor has stayed safely locked in the surrounding rock for billions of years. So from human error to Cold War ambition to geology itself, we've seen where these extreme hotspots come from. But what do they all teach us? What are the lessons we can pull from these radioactive frontiers? Each of these places is way more than just a scary data point. It's a profound lesson. Chernobyl basically forced us to invent the science of radioecology, to understand how entire ecosystems recover from contamination. Goiânia showed us that the danger doesn't always come from some giant reactor. It can be hiding in plain sight. Oklo gave us a stunning natural blueprint for how to store our own nuclear waste. And Ramsar just continues to challenge everything we think we know about how life adapts to radiation. And this brings us to a really fascinating paradox. In the Chernobyl exclusion zone, once you take people out of the picture, wildlife populations have boomed. That doesn't mean the radiation is good for them. Individual animals definitely show the effects. But the ecosystem as a whole has bounced back. Now contrast that with the people near Semipalatinsk, where that chronic, lower-level exposure has caused terrible health issues across generations. It just shows that the biological impact of radiation is incredibly complex. It depends on the dose, how long you're exposed, and even just the presence or absence of us. Ultimately, these places all drive home a pretty sobering reality. The half-life of these radioactive elements can be tens, hundreds, thousands, even millions of years. They outlast governments, they outlast nations, they outlast entire civilizations. A decision made in a split second, a flawed reactor design, a moment of panic, can leave a toxic legacy that endures for millennia. And that leaves us with one final thought. This tour of Earth's radioactive hotspots, it shows us the planet's immense natural power and the profound, long-lasting consequences of our own technology. These places, they're warnings, for sure, but they're also teachers. The question for us is, what are we going to do with these lessons? How do we move forward with this powerful, invisible force, with the kind of humility and respect it truly demands?